All right. If we could start our meeting. Thank you all for being here this evening. Like to give us a roll call, please.
Certainly. Trustee Rubin.
Yes.
Trustee Hallwax.
Here.
Trustee Mealopoulos.
Here.
We have our quorum.
All right. At this point, if there is anyone in the public or otherwise that would like to make a comment or address our committee, now's the time. Not everyone at once. Okay. Hearing none, then could I get a motion, unless anyone has anything to discuss in the draft of the minutes for approval of prior month's minutes? Move to approve minutes.
Thank you.
All those in favor? Aye. All right, minutes are approved. And with that, Nikki, would you please lead us through the financial?
See now? That's a little
I
much.
gotta click back in there.
Okay.
Set now.
All right, so tonight we're going to go through the September Treasurer's Report, which I will be somewhat brief because we do have a very in-depth conversation coming with the financial forecast. We'll do our CIP monthly updates, property tax levy estimate, and round that out with the 5-year financial forecast. So getting right into the September report, we have good news for all of us that today the Cook County property tax bills are out, so they are available online. I would remind anyone that's watching that the village does not assess your property. That is done through the township. Anecdotally, we've certainly heard from a number of residents that have seen some significant increases. So this is the result of the most recent triennial assessment. On the village side, we have seen some significant growth in our EAV, which is a good news story for us, especially as we start to go out for bonds. It is a positive thing for us to be able to tell the rating agency that the value of our properties are increasing. The bills are due by December 1st, which is what we were anticipating to happen. So we could start seeing distributions as soon as this month. It all depends on how fast Cook County collects those dollars and turns those around, because we do have some folks that, believe it or not, the day they get their bill, they pay it right away. So we'll start to see those trickle in later this month and then hope to receive all of our property tax revenue before the end of the year. So that's a good news story. Year to date, we're running higher this year, higher than last year by about 2.4 million. When we back out those beginning of the year payments, we're running about 272,000 high, which is a good position for us to be in. We did not receive any property tax receipts in September, which is not unusual because the bills were not out. In a normal year, we would have expected to see that if the county was on time with the second installment. On a sales tax basis, we were both lower than last year and our monthly budget, but I don't think it's time to panic right now. We are still running higher than our year-to-date budget, and this is based off of June sales. So we're sitting at about 70% of our revenue budget for the year. I still think we'll exceed the budget target for this year. Our places for eating tax, parking fees, and fixed water sales are all still running higher than last year and monthly budget. Our normal taxes that have been running high all year long are income tax, utility, telecom use tax, and PPRT. We're less than our monthly budget targets this year or this month, which is not necessarily a surprise on some of those, but they're all still running, again, higher than year-to-date budget. So we're still on track with those revenues. And as you'll see later in the presentation, we're still on track for quite a significant surplus in the general fund this year. Our expenditures are higher than last year, which is also expected with salary increases, timing of some of our capital projects, but they're only at 59.3% of budget. I do expect our expenditures to come in under budget overall this year in the general fund, notably because we do have some significant projects that we know will not be completed this year that will roll into next year. So you'll see more of that as we present the draft budget of what exactly we're planning on rolling over. In the water fund, our volumetric revenue is higher than last year, so is our fixed charge. Running 77.8, 75.6% of budget. Large driver of that is our annual rate increases. We've also seen some pretty consistent irrigation over the summer, for better or for worse, depending on which side of the coin you're on there. But it
I
is,
just wrote a
Good
check
call.
for close to $1,000.
thank you for that.
We're
We
grateful.
do appreciate your contribution.
I was very excited they turned off the sprinklers today.
So that being said, I think a lot of folks are in your court right now. So we will start to see those revenues drop down a little bit. Our expenditures are higher than last year was what we would expect. As you recall, we did defer a portion of the water main project last year. So it is higher over year, but we are within our budgetary target for this year and what we were expecting to complete.
Sorry,
Sure.
quick question. That our operating expenses are projected to be higher than budget or about where we were on budget?
About where we were or less.
Okay, just on operating, not,
Yes,
yeah, even without the CapEx deferrals.
correct.
Okay, that's what I thought. All right, thanks.
Still living within our means. Yes, that's an important question. Okay, and I'm going to turn it over to Stella to give the golf club update.
Thank you. September was an exciting month. We did receive 2 awards from Audubon for our Bio Blitz. We came in second place in our photo and second place in community engagement. So that's a national program. We're pretty proud of that. We had over 600 rounds played by local high schools. So Loyola, New Trier, North Country Day, and Evanston have all utilized the course. So we're happy to be able to give back to the community in that way. Driving range usage is very high this year, and with our new ball dispenser, we have found out that 49% of our membership on the range are Glencoe residents. The next highest is 12% for Winnetka. So it's as we suspected that a lot of residents use the range that maybe that belong to a private club and don't play there, but they are using our driving range. The clubhouse design review met twice in September. They narrowed down 50 designs to 1. They're moving forward with a prairie style design. And we will be seeing 2 examples of that at their next meeting, which is this coming Monday. And that concludes my report.
Thank you, Stella.
Thank you.
Okay, moving on to the rest of the funds. Our debt service, motor fuel tax, and capital project funds are all as expected. You'll hear a little bit more about the activity in the capital projects fund when Margaret gives the CIP update. Personnel overtime remains elevated. Full-time salaries and pension contributions have all increased as planned. We have seen a number of lateral hires that have come in salaries that were higher than what we had anticipated when we prepared the budget. So we are seeing the impact of that. We still have several vacancies that are more than accounting for that right now. And as we've discussed with pension, that contribution looks much higher than it should because of the mix-up with the county last year. So we should start to see that equalize as we get further into the year and we're comparing year-over-year numbers.
So if you add salaries and overtime prior year, current date to current year, just eyeballing it, we're running at what, 10% over the combined?
Over last year, about so, yeah,
Not quite 10, because I'm
a
mixing.
little shy. And I mean, that would be
Not
expected.
expected, I think if we.
Salary
increases
But the point, right, I was gonna say, I
Makes
think
sense.
that's not necessarily because we're at fully allocated staff, but because salaries have adjusted during the course from year to year.
Essentially because we had about 10 vacancies last year. 11.
Yeah.
I should be looking at you, that's right. So, and now we're down to four.
So you or people
So-
adjust that, actually, we're probably less than 5 year on year. If you take into account
If
those.
we accounted for the difference in positions, yes.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So.
Great, thank you.
Actually not bad, no, that's a good question. And we will continue in next year, you'll see, when we present the draft budget for you, we'll have an optimistic, fully staffed personnel budget as well. You'll see that as we present that next month. Okay, so as we look into financial projections for the month, then we'll get into the 5-year annual revenue projections. This is revenue only versus budget. Our general fund is running 3 million high. If I back out those property taxes, it's about a 1.4 million surplus over what we were anticipating. There's a number of things that are driving that. Sales tax is a big one, income tax is a big one, even property taxes are contributing to that. So we've had some really strong performance in revenue this year. On the water fund side, we're about 25,000 less than what we're predicting in budget. That can vary from year to year depending on irrigation patterns and weather. So even though we've seen some strong revenue.
Yeah, we'll start seeing it.
Your irrigation's
It's gonna
not
do
bad.
now that our sprinklers are off.
So we may end the year under budget in revenue with the water fund, but we'll keep watching that. When we add expenditures into that equation, the general fund is looking at a $935,000 surplus. When we back out those property tax revenues, this is better, much better than what we planned. We were planning for a $1.4 million deficit. Some of that, well, all of that deficit was for capital spending. Some of that is because those projects are not happening. And some of that is obviously the revenue surplus that's contributing to that. The water fund is expected when we add in expenditures to end with a surplus of 1.6 million. The biggest driver of that obviously is the issuance of the revenue bonds. General fund reserves at month end are at 67%. Again, I'll caution you, these are unaudited. We still have a couple months to go. But we are deliberately trying to increase those reserves so we can fund some of our capital over the next 5 years. Same with the water fund, it's at 109%, obviously because we're trying to aggregate and spend that money on water fund improvements. On the inflation side, we'll get to this in a little bit more detail in a moment, but these trends have both been incorporated into the draft budget that you will see next month. Our commodities are running higher than last year. They're at 94% of budget. We're just seeing some significant increases in certain areas. We've outlined a number of those in the memo for you. And contractual services are also higher than last year. They're running at 82% of budget, which is a little high. Some of those service contracts are volume-based and they vary year to year. But as we start to talk about the budget recommendations, you'll see that a lot of our contracts are creeping up, which may lead us as part of the budget process to evaluate different ways of doing things. And those would come forth as recommendations to the board for consideration.
The question about your annual projected bullet, we're like better than planned for this year because we've deferred some things to next year. How do we know how much of the better than planned is really like not? I mean, how do we account for what we're going to spend next year in those numbers?
So we do that in the 5-year forecast, and also in the budget process when we talk about the multi-year plan. When we present the capital budget to you this month, you'll see everything that's planned in 2024, and we annotate those projects that have been rolled forward. There's also a process that we go through in February or March, depending on the timing, where any projects that are bleeding into December, we cut them off as of December 31st. It's an accounting thing we have to do. And anything that carries into January or February to finish up a project, we'll bring that before the village board to approve as a rollover. Because the village is on an appropriation system, all of our appropriation authority lapses as of December 31st. So we can no longer spend those funds without getting authority from the board to finish out that project. So typically it takes about 30 days to kind of flush out all those year-end invoices, and then we'll come back to the board and tell you everything that we're going to be rolling over. But we do try, when we're going through the budget process and when we talk about the financial forecast, ask each of the departments to fill out their year-end estimates of what they expect to spend and what they won't, controversy or on the reverse side of things, what they won't spend, and then we roll that into the forecast. Good question. Okay, diving a little bit more into the inflation impacts, our last patrol vehicle was delivered this month, so that's great. We can just get them upfitted.
Yeah.
That would be great. So
We're
we do-
using them for Uber now.
There's a revenue generator that I have not thought about. So they're unmarked, it's an option. If you have anybody sitting around tonight, there you go, Andy. So that concludes all 6 vehicles that we ordered, so that's a great place to be in. Our Public Works Department is still waiting on the aerial truck. We're optimistically hoping for December. That is what we are hearing from the dealer. And our dump body also hoping for that to still be delivered this month or worst case, early November. In the section of the financial report where we outline all of the areas that we're seeing increases in commodities and contractual services, the new ones are PVC pipe, where we've seen a 35% jump year over year, and concrete, which has jumped 15% year over year. And I think we just saw that, and the board will see that on Thursday with the formal rejection of the Dundee Road sidewalk bids. So we're hopeful that will at least stabilize next year, and that is one of the projects that you will see come back before you in the 24 budget. Any questions on the treasurer's report?
Quick question on, thank you very much. Quick question, a technical thing. Looking at the cash report that you put out for the month and where all the money is, beginning balance, end balance, et cetera, how would we have a substantial negative balance in one of the accounts at North Shore? Now, we had more money with them in other accounts. But I'm looking at a capital funds project negative balance. I understand from accounting, but I'm wondering from a bank statement balance, how we had almost a $2 million negative balance at the beginning and then subsequently a positive balance.
So it's a good question. What this report is broken down by fund, and some of our bank accounts, because we operate under a governmental fund accounting system, we have some bank accounts that have money with multiple funds.
Okay,
And what
that's the
happens
answer.
is,
Got it.
especially with the capital projects fund, which is the one that I think you're referring to,
Yeah.
we will pay bills out of the accounting system, out of that fund. It will come out of the overall cash balance. And then about usually quarterly, we'll do an adjustment to make sure that we get those numbers correct.
Yeah, it just popped out as a.
And particularly with the capital projects fund, we have, those bond proceeds are invested in a money market. And as we are spending down those funds, each quarter, we're trying to do a drawdown of that money market to reimburse the funds at North Shore. We're trying to leave it in the money market as long as we can, so
Sure.
we can get some investment proceeds on there, but that's a good question too. All right, moving right along, I'll hand it over to Margaret to give the update on CIP.
Good evening. So tonight's October update is on page 54 and 55 for the monthly update, and the quarterly is on page 56. We had several projects that their target dates have changed this evening. The roll call training room renovation, we are gonna have the furniture and information technology items brought to the board for approval in November instead of this month in October. The replacement of Unit 3 step van, we have that vehicle, but we are gonna have it fully outfitted by the end of the year, and so coming to the board in October, the upfitting of that vehicle. The street resurfacing and street improvements projects will be completed in October instead of September. There was a few punch list items. As Director Larson stated, the new sidewalk Dundee project has officially been moved to 2024 in our budget. So you'll see that when you see the draft budget. And then we have the replacement of the public safety chief's vehicle being brought to the board in October as well. And staff's available to answer any questions you have about those items.
Thanks, Margaret.
ERP implementation. Explain a little bit about what we're doing in December. Or it just started last year and it's being finished this year.
This is hopefully the last year. I know Sharon's thinking the same thing.
It started in 2018.
So what, yes, the year that I started. So this should be the last of it. We're completing the last phase, which is the implementation of the building permits module. We're actually having a test, I believe, sometime next week, right, for the online permitting module. I'll check in with Taylor on those dates. And I think, so that would be the last phase. We are actually live on it, in-house. The last phase of it will be the online module where we allow people to pay for certain permits online. So those are items that we're working through. Some of the considerations that we're thinking through is, as you'll see during the budget process, our credit card fees have gone up significantly. It's become a cost of operations. Stella's nodding because she's seeing the same thing at the golf course, as we are quickly becoming less currency based. The thought process is, as these credit cards are increasing, does it make sense to take payments for some of these large permits online? Because as the dollar amount goes up, the fee structure goes up as well. So one of the logistics that we're working out with this online module is whether or not we will allow folks to enter their bank account information, because an ACH is a lot cheaper, a lot less expensive, because we don't want to get ourselves into a situation where we're actually paying people to take their money. You know, there's a cost of operation certainly, but we need to be able to balance that out. So we're experimenting with how we roll that out and with which permits. But our hope is that this is going to be the last year. December 31st, we should be done.
Is one possibility to do what more and more vendors are doing, which is to say if you pay with a credit card, we're charging, they pass it along to you right then?
We could do that. And that would be a policy recommendation that we will likely bring back to the board.
I mean, the state, the Secretary of State does that.
One of the things that happened when we went live with this ERP system is that the vendor of the software required us to change to their merchant. And with that, we've seen credit card fees increase. Now, that's a combination of increased utilization and more accessibility for our residents, but also that merchant is.
Are we stuck with that merchant forever?
Not necessarily. So that's something that is going to be in the goals for the Department of Finance and Administration next year to evaluate whether or not we would recommend moving away to a different
That's a
merchant.
pretty competitive industry.
It is,
I
it
mean,
is.
they're all trying to make as much money as they can, but they're competing with each other.
Right.
And it's complex. The credit card fees themselves, the structures are complex. The merchant processor has their set of fees. And then Visa, MasterCard, Amex all have theirs that layer on top. But we are starting to see that trend because everyone's using their credit cards now, that a lot of people are passing those on.
Well, if the state can do it, we should be able to do it too.
And we can. It's really going to be a decision of the board of whether or not you want to pass that on. I mean, historically, the village has absorbed that cost as just a cost of operating, but we may be reaching a point where that could be a pivot point.
Well, I think what we'll look at, because at the Secretary of State's office, the way they run it is that if you have a direct debit from your checking account, there is no fee.
Right.
And so I think what we want to try to make sure we have is alternatives for people so that it doesn't just look like it's a money grab on our side. So I think that's a component of some of what Nikki was talking about as we look at how we're going to accept it. With certain transactions, it's more of an impact than others. But we're talking about building permit fees. In some cases, there's a significant escrow deposit that's a part of it that can, if somebody's using a credit card for a air conditioning unit, the permit fee is $100, the deposit's $500. that $600 charge is more significant than it needs to be because we're accepting it as a credit card payment. What we're trying to figure out is where that threshold might be where we say, you know, there's no fee if it's under X. If it's over X, here's your fee schedule,
Mhm.
or just give us your checking account information and we'll do a direct debit, that type of thing. So
And it is significantly cheaper from the banking side to do the direct debit. One thing that we have to keep in mind as a non-home rule unit is that we really have to be able to justify that fee and make sure we're not overcharging. And it can vary significantly. To Phil's point, you know, if we have an $80,000 permit for a new construction home, we could be getting to a point where we're being charged $3,000 in credit card fees for that
Yeah,
transaction. It just gets
We
exorbitant.
should never
after a
do
certain
that,
point.
and our residents totally get it already, because as residents, we're dealing with that in every place else we look.
Yes, and the other aspect of credit card payments is that you also have to be careful. It is very easy to stop a credit card payment. So that's the other thing that we want to dip our toe in. It's a little different taking credit cards for water payments, because if someone were to stop payment on a water payment, we have the ability to terminate their service and they will pay that amount very quickly. In the case of a building permit, it's not always that easy. So that's also something that we have to kind of dip our toe in and see how it goes for a while before we make a
Maybe we should
recommendation.
stop taking credit cards for those.
And that's one of the things that we're evaluating is which permits might be appropriate to take credit cards for.
what we also want to do is make it convenient. So
Right.
the entire point of this, of the online portal from a permitting standpoint is to streamline the process. So as we look at these alternatives, that's also front of mind for us. It's not just taking payments, it's actually submitting and managing a permit process from the start to the end.
Comments.
So we want to make sure that, again, however we end up doing it, we don't want to force somebody to have to drive to Village Hall to drop a check off, because that actually slows the whole process down. So that's why there's a lot of kind of, okay, if we do this, then, if we do this, then, and we're working through those details.
Trustee Mealopoulos, though, to your original question about project expenses or comment about it, when we get to the finish line and we're in project closeout, we have some retainage that we've accrued along the way, so we'll be paying that out. So a good portion of what's budgeted for this year is that retainage.
Also included in your packet is this year's property tax levy estimate. You may recall when we started to talk about financial policies, I believe that was in August. We had brought before this body the fact that we were allowed to go as high as 5% our tax levy. The general consensus of the committee was to go ahead and budget for that 5% and plan for that. As part of our tax extension process, we do have to have a public hearing where the public body can open up a hearing for comments on the property tax levy. We're recommending that hearing take place at the November board meeting, so that'll be November 16th. That would allow for presentation and comment. The total levy that we've prepared, the levy estimate, is just over 17 million, or I guess just shy of 18 million. This includes a 5.3% increase from the 2022 tax extension. This includes an assumption for new growth. We use about 15 years of tax history to come up with our new growth assumption. So it is fairly moderate considering today's real estate market and where it's at. We've seen some fairly wild swings in EAV. Last year, the county applied a state equalizer and cut our EAV to much less than what I was expecting. This year, we've seen an upward swing that's been fairly significant to the point where I think Phil and I are both a little distrusting of the number. But to some extent, we've also seen slow growth in the EAV as property tax values have actually risen. It's not unusual for the county to be several years behind in adjusting to market value, so we were expecting an upward swing on market value, but not this much. So again, that's a good thing, but we have a fairly conservative estimate in there in terms of new growth for next year. The actual increase in our levy will be determined based off of the property tax extension law, so the county will review our submission and they will cut us down to exactly what they think is allowable for the year. The library has prepared a similar estimate. As you probably remember, every year the library submits their request to us, and then we pass on that official levy as this voting board has the authority to submit their levy. The debt service levy that's prepared, I've included the number in here. We're actually not required to have a hearing on that particular levy line, but we do present that just in transparency. That's based off of all the bond issues that we've approved thus far. So that number is actually not subject to PTEL. That is submitted to the county when we approve the ordinance, the bond ordinance. When the bond ordinance is finalized, the county will automatically add that levy in, and they automatically will add on a 5% addition to that levy line to make sure that the village will get the full amount that's needed to pay our principal and interest. Because throughout the year, as folks dispute their property taxes, those amounts are deducted from the distributions that we get. So the county adds that 5% to just make sure that we have the money we need to pay off our debt. This is in your packet, so I apologize that it's fairly small. But this goes line item by line item. What we are requesting, a couple things that I would just note here. The fire pension fund levy, that's funding that final beneficiary that we have. We do carve that out as a part of our general corporate levy. So when that levy line is no longer needed, we'll just roll that into the general corporate levy. The police pension levy with new AV hopefully will end up around 1.5 million. You'll see later in the financial forecast, our contribution's 2.7, so we don't cover that amount through property taxes. The rest of that will come from the general fund. And it's my understanding that the library is meeting next month on their levy, I believe. If that final recommendation will come to President Rowan. Any questions on the levy estimate or the hearing? Okay, so we will prepare the documents that are necessary and issue a public notice for the hearing for November. Okay, moving right along in the financial forecast. So just a big overview on the 5-year forecast. This runs from 2024 through 2028. It's focused on the major funds, our general operating fund, our water fund, our MFT fund, and just some major items that are influencing the forecast. A lot of the same things that we've been talking about month to month. Rising inflation, supplies and commodity costs, supply chain disruptions and logistical challenges that you've been hearing all year. I will revisit that in a moment, so I'm just going to put a pin on that. Prioritization of infrastructure improvements continues. We actually met this morning working on finalizing the 10-year CIP and what we're going to be recommending for the board to consider in 24. And also related to that, debt financing plan that would go along with those infrastructure needs. So if you remember from last year, what we will present to the board is the full detail of what we're planning for the next 10 years, and then also a proposed financing plan as to how we will fund all of that. We will still be on the lookout for adjusting for state budget impacts. This includes any measures that the state might make to adjust our state shared revenues, sales tax, its personal property replacement, income tax, or any unfunded mandates that might be coming down the pipeline. No pun intended, because we will be talking about lead service lines in a moment. And we're also looking about, continuing to look at designing fee structures around cost as the cost of our commodities, our supplies, our personnel is rising. We are also evaluating all of our fees and fines to make sure we're covering as much of that cost as we can. And you will see, as part of the budget process next month, several recommendations to increase fees to make sure we're covering those costs. Couple highlights on the general fund. The forecast predicts that operating revenues exceed expenditures through 2026. I will say this is not a cause or time to panic. What we are generally seeing is that the cost to operate right now is rising. That shouldn't be surprising to any of them or to anyone. There are still several unknowns that we're working through the budget process. And we're still refining those numbers, and there are still some levers that we can pull in terms of increasing revenues and modifying that. But it is something we wanted to draw to your attention because expenditures are generally rising. On the contrary, some general trends that we're seeing in revenue. Again, the property taxes are expected to rise about 5%. Some of those fees and fines that we're looking at increasing, the sewer fees are recommended to increase 5%. That's been programmed into the forecast. That's really to comply with that inflow and infiltration program. We do have to do, I think it's by 2042. We have to make sure that there's no inflow into our sanitary system and be lining those systems where it needs to be lined. The garbage services collection fee, if you recall, this fee is to cover the cost of the impact of garbage collection on our road program. So it covers things such as asphalt patching, road maintenance, but also our special collection programs as well, recycling programs and such. We are seeing telecom tax and use tax declining. Again, this is not a surprise. Telecom tax has been declining for the past 5 years. We expect it to continue down that road for the next 5. And use tax is declining. We're starting to see sales taxes kind of leveling out with this new legislation that incorporates a lot of our online sales tax revenue. And accordingly, use tax is going down because less of that is applied. We're projecting sales tax, utility tax, building permits and alarm fees to be relatively stable. I think we've kind of capped out on sales tax at the moment. So you'll see in the forecast, those are very modest increases in the out years. Income taxes will increase next year while PPRT decreases. This is a fascinating story. I know we talked a little bit about this at the last meeting. As more information is released on this, now that it's come out that the Illinois Department of Revenue made an error that actually goes back to 2021. So now they're trying to recoup money not only from 21, but also 22, 23. We did not get a PPRT receipt in September, which was not unusual. That was consistent with last year. But we did get something in October, which is shocking to me because I was really expecting we would get nothing. For the current year, if we don't get any PPRT for the rest of the year, we'll still end up the year over budget because it's been doing so well. But I do expect for the next 3 years, at least, for this PPRT to kind of remain lower. On the expenditure side, salary and contractual costs, obviously, we've seen a lot of upward pressure from the market. That is starting to level off a little bit, but we will likely see higher increases in our CBAs as we've seen in previous years. The only cost of living adjustment that is confirmed for next year, we do have some placeholders in the budget right now, is the AFSCME contract that covers our public works employees that is set for 3% in their existing contract. We've talked a lot about inflation. I don't think I have anything new for you there. Okay, so this last bullet point, planning for infrastructure costs. So this is a large driver of how we spend our fund balance. Really, the only thing that would allow us to have a deficit budget is for these one-time capital improvements. And now knowing that we've set a new fund balance target of 25%, we have to take a look at that strategically as to how we are spending down that fund balance over the next 10 years and still keeping that fund balance in mind. The good news is in the out years of the forecast through 2028, even with this worst case scenario where we are starting to eat into the operating budget a little bit, we're still within our fund balance target of 25. We're still above it. So that is a good news story that we haven't necessarily seen in all of the previous financial forecasts. So we are doing some right things. We are headed in the right direction, and I don't want to make this sound like it's all doom and gloom. But something that we need to consider and what we're looking for feedback from the finance committee tonight is the challenges that we've seen with vehicle replacements. As you've seen each month, sometimes vehicles show up without any announcement, and sometimes they take 8 or 9 or 12 or 24 months to show up. One of the things that we are looking at next year are some significant replacements in our fleet. One of the largest being our public safety squad. That vehicle is scheduled for replacement in 2025. What we are hearing is that delivery times can be anywhere from 24 to 36 months. Something that we would like the committee to consider and discuss this evening is whether or not we should be ordering those vehicles in advance and whether or not we need to budget for it in 24. The thought process being, do we want to put $1 million in the 2025 budget if we know that we likely, or the 24 budget, excuse me, if we likely won't receive that vehicle until 25 or 26? Because particularly in the case of the squad, those vehicles are so custom.
The squad being
Fire engine.
The fire
fire
engine,
engine.
yes. Sorry. Because it's so custom, it takes that long to build, and they're out about 24 to 36 months. We've seen other communities that have been pressured to pay upfront. Some of the providers are allowing a 3% discount. The danger there being you're taking a gamble that that company is going to go under, that they will deliver the vehicle. Some of them are asking for deposits. I would certainly defer to the preference of this committee, but I don't know that I would recommend an upfront payment or a deposit in this environment, just given the unknowns. We obviously have to go out to the providers and see what they will offer. But the question for this committee is, would you be comfortable if after the budget is approved in December, we put a line item on there to order these vehicles if there's not a budgeted number in the 24 budget? In the astronomical circumstance that they come through and we get the fire engine in November of next year, we could always come back and amend the budget. But what we're trying to do is take a more realistic view of the budget of what are we actually going to spend and build our revenues around what we think we can actually get done. And just looking at it realistically with the circumstances that are here today, I just can't with a straight face tell you that we will get the squad next year.
Seems to me that if we really have a low percentage chance of getting the new fire truck next year, whether we put it in the budget or not, I guess the question is, okay, if you thought you were going to get it next year, would you therefore not do what? You wouldn't go put a water pipe in? I mean, what are you not doing as a result of the fact that you have to pay for the fire truck? Or are you just going to pay for the fire truck and in fact will project a lower fund balance? I mean, what's the change?
It would be shuffling the deck because the fire truck is still in the 10-year plan. We would essentially accelerate the spend down of fund balance. If it were to arrive November, we would accelerate that from 25 to 24. It would be a year's worth of difference. But we wouldn't program something in to the 10-year CIP that we couldn't sustain with the financial forecast. So it would really just be putting, it's like a left pocket, right pocket a little bit.
Okay.
but there's some legal.
No, I appreciate that. There's legal, and also you just, I appreciate the fact that you don't want to budget for something big and then it doesn't happen and you're like, well, wait, your expenditures were how much less than your budget? And then you have to explain why. It's like,
Right.
why did my real estate tax bill go up? Well, it's still, we still have to pay for it, but we just have to pay for it tomorrow instead of yesterday. And we only ask you for taxes twice a year. What we've got, I forget what the aggregate amount of CapEx is in the course of the next 5 years here. But it's quite substantial. What do we got? 3, 6, 8, about $11 million of CapEx, round numbers, over a 5-year period. And that trails quite a bit at the end. Yeah, right. So I say, why don't you not, I mean, again, it's subject to everybody's own personal thoughts. I'd say, don't put it in the budget for next year. Understand that we may have to go to the board and say, sorry, we got lucky, it came early. Somebody else didn't want to take theirs and we're taking that one instead or something. And we'll have to revise the budget midstream. But let's forget that, accounting and PR element. Let's focus on, we need a fire truck to keep everyone safe. Let's order the fire truck.
I think the likelihood, fire truck may be an extreme example of a vehicle that, from a timeline standpoint, we would expect to get. I think it is realistic that the fire truck is a 24-month lead, just because our last one was an 18-month lead and life was normal back then in 2016. So, but I do think we had this conversation this morning. We've got 2 rather large pieces of equipment in Public Works next year. 2 dump trucks, essentially, that are in the aggregate, $350,000. It's possible and perhaps more likely that we will get those vehicles next year. The lead times generally have eased, or we've gone in the past and found them elsewhere and waived kind of the formal process that we've historically gone through in order to get something in our hands sooner. But I think that may be a better example of something that we're probably going to budget for. Though there's a possibility we won't get it next year, though it's more likely to get it than not. And I think just as we build it out, it's our preference for something like a fire engine, which again is a large piece of equipment, uniquely expensive, only comes up every 15 to 20 years, depending upon what we're talking about, that it makes sense for us to move forward with the order, which means the board is going to act, right? The board is going to bind, and we're going to put an order in. We're not going to prepay for it because that doesn't seem to make sense. There was a time where that did make sense. We will also circle back with the village attorney on this because this is not a clear area of kind of the legal structure for appropriations and or a board binding a future board to something. So for instance, there may be some inability to commit the village board to something past the term of the current village president. So the current village president's term extends through April of 2025. So we have to think about that also, that if it's 24 months, we may have to just make sure that the village attorney is comfortable that a board is binding a future board in a way that somebody wouldn't challenge. It would require a future board to challenge what the past board did, which is not a likely scenario.
And not get a fire engine.
And not get a fire engine.
I'm going back to
you're right. You're right.
Do you need something on wheels that'll put out a fire or not?
Right.
And if you do, all those things is anybody really? I appreciate
I'm
the
not
technical
worried, I'm not
analysis.
worried about it, but that just gives you a little bit of why we wanted to bring it up, that there is some technical
It'll be
complexity.
the next board.
And I do
This is
think
why Steve is on retainer.
there's
Not my term of office.
this is not a board that would challenge something like that.
Yeah.
A future board challenge the action of a past board. I would say that is possible some places. It's not likely here. So, and I don't bring that up to be something that should be overly worrisome, but it just kind of lends to the complexity of, there used to be a time where if you budgeted to buy something within 12 months, you were pretty sure you were going to get it. Those days are past.
Let me ask you a silly question, and maybe Steve will tell us this is the fix. You have to budget now or in 2024 to put in the order, even though you don't think you're gonna spend the money, but that makes what you're doing, that takes care of whatever technical problems. If that's the case, then that's the case.
Well, it
But
doesn't
otherwise,
really because of
I
our
would-
appropriation structure. So because we reappropriate on a 12-month cycle,
Okay.
that doesn't necessarily, because a future board could choose not to appropriate,
Well, that means anything you order,
for sure.
So,
if you reorder Diet Coke on December 27th and you don't get it till January 5th, you have the same technical problem you've just described, sir.
It would
And
break
no
my
one's
heart
worried
too.
about it.
It would break my heart.
No, but I don't mean to downplay it for $1 million item. I'm just saying,
so just let me summarize where I think we
I
are.
think it's okay.
Sometimes there are some big items that we think, but we're not sure we're gonna get, and there are other big items that we think we probably won't get, but we might. And the suggestion is, we should be budgeting for the stuff that we think is gonna happen and not for the stuff that we think isn't, subject to our lawyers telling us that would be illegal, in which case we'll follow the law. And so I just think that's what we should do. And I have just one question on the law. Does this law, is this a home rule versus non-home rule thing? So please add that to the list. Part of the reason we have to have a lawyer on retainer every time we sneeze is because we're constantly screwing around. We've seen it, we've seen it 4 times tonight. We have to do this because we're not home rule. We have to do that because we're not home rule. And sometimes we think we have to do some kind of stuff our residents wouldn't love. So let's please keep the list, because we're probably gonna wanna go to our residents and say, enough already.
Hopefully next year.
That's good feedback. So pending approval and sign off of the village attorney, he's okay with us moving forward. What we will likely do is structure the agenda in December such that the budget will be approved first, including the 10-year CIP and the appropriations plan. And then we will likely have some vehicle orders right after that so that we can get those placed in December in hopes that we will get the items that we are actually budgeting for in 24. And then understanding that the engine may or may not be in that mix. Okay. Okay, the next item that we wanted to discuss with the board are lead service line replacements. The good news is this program has been wildly successful. There's a lot of interest in it. So we've had a lot of folks opt to voluntarily replace their lead service lines. So just to recap, generally on the program, there is a state mandate that all of the lead service lines be replaced by 2042. There is a lot of question at the state level as to who is ultimately responsible to bear the entire cost of these replacements. We've talked about this in the past. All signs are leading to the village is ultimately responsible to make it happen. Whether or not the cost be fully borne on us is still being worked out. One of the benefits of trying to offer this incentive program is to get people to replace it voluntarily in advance incentivize them to do it now before it costs a lot more later. One of the things that we're rolling into the 10-year CIP plan is planning for all of this and compliance with this mandate. And something that we have found as a learning process this year is that these lead service line replacements are driving up operating costs in other areas. It's costing us money in some of the fixtures that we provide as part of the lead service line replacements, repairing the right-of-way that are being dug up as part of this process. So those added expenses have all been kind of rolled into the 2024 budget that we'll be presenting to you next month, and you'll hear a little bit more about that. We have budgeted $250,000 for lead service line replacements this year. We have about $45,000 of backlog. Those were improvements that were already done prior to the board adopting the reimbursement program. We had agreed that we would kind of wait and do those later on. We also have another 65,000, I think, in the queue that are just kind of pending. We're waiting to be completed, and they haven't submitted for reimbursement yet. We will spend the full 250 this year. One of the things we wanted to present to the finance committee, whether or not you are comfortable with us moving forward with that $45,000 backlog to get that off the books and move on with budgeting for next year. So that was something I just wanted to open up for discussion, and then I don't know if you had anything you'd like to add, Phil.
No, I think the only thing, as we've talked about it, is it would be nice to be able to start next year. As Nikki said, you know, we already have a number of replacements in the queue. We'd like to continue the replacement process as opposed to the look back process. And the fund can support those additional $45,000 worth of past replacements that took place this year. I think it's our suggestion that we try to clear that this year if we can.
Does that mean there's no further work is going to get done this year on that so that you'd be getting more builds in for current work?
We would fulfill the 250,000 that we have in the queue already. And then we would clear out the 45,000 backlog, and understanding that some of that remaining 60 might carry into next year's program. Some of them may not get done yet. It's just been, plans have been approved and they're still working through the process.
Essentially, what we're talking about is boosting the 250 to 295 this year, to again, clear those backlogged ones and then just focus for the future on the ongoing replacement process.
It sounds like it may be, well, you guys tell me differently, given the number that need to get done and the cost per, that the 44 might be waiting a very long time if we don't just step up and accelerate that. So I think to be neighborly, given the spirit of the program, I'd be fine with it.
Yes, you know, we said we were doing this, it's a limited amount. Let's do it, and then let's keep going. And I think as we look at this, we obviously want our residents to step up, and we are prepared to step up and pay, you know, half. I probably won't be around when the piper has to be paid in 2042, but I think we need to figure out a way to encourage our residents to do it all before then. And I think maybe we should have
I think that's working. As Nikki said, there is no shortage of applicants.
And maybe we want to telegraph that the village's contribution in 2035 is going to be less.
Well, then we're going to have to fund it more also coming up. So 250 is what we're finding is that our reimbursement is hovering in the neighborhood of $8,000. Where it caps out is 10.
Right.
So we're in the the zone of
Mhm.
where we think it needs to be. I think if we want to, there is no shortage of applicants.
Okay.
So people are aware of the program. When the letters went out earlier this summer, there was a quick rush. If you drive down Vernon Avenue, you see the street cuts. There were 7 or 8 of them within a block of each other. They are taking place. They are taking advantage of the program, which is what we want. That's a good thing. I will say we have budgeted an accelerator, and I don't remember what that is in the CIP. Is it a 3%?
I think it's 3.
You know, if we want to accelerate it further, we've got to work that into the long-range financial plan in terms of how the water fund can support it. But, 250 will go quick. We've got 550 of these to do in total. So.
All right, well, the answer to your initial question is, it sounds like yes. Back, let's bump the number to the back.
And you'll see more detail on what we're planning in the out years.
Do we have to do any change? Will that be a net change to the?
We will adjust it in the.
Authorization? Yeah, okay. Good.
It's higher than 3%. Yeah, so
Fine.
I've seen
Maybe
it,
do 5.
I've seen it
Good.
at 3, it depends on the year, but
That's
yeah.
fine. That's good. But yeah, Gary, and then what I would anticipate is that those will be paid out in the last check cut of the fiscal year.
I have a question. If we were fortunate enough to become a home rule community, that would open up other opportunities, wouldn't it, to collect fees for this, for instance, a real estate transfer tax, and one of the conditions of the transfer would be bringing things up to code.
I think if we were to, certainly a real estate transfer tax is a possibility for home rule communities. It's a 2-step process. You have to become home rule, so that's step 1, and then you have a second referendum that accommodates the creation of a real estate transfer tax. So you can condition it for sure. The city of Lake Forest is probably one of the few communities that has initiated a real estate transfer tax in recent history. They conditioned it that it was going to simply be utilized to fund their CIP, and that frankly, other property taxes would be reduced to kind of make up the difference, or to fill in that gap. Those kinds of things are very possible. I will say real estate transfer taxes are not easy to convince people of.
Very unpopular.
And usually it's the real estate industry that comes out in force against it. But to your point, Home Rule Authority does grant significant opportunity to generate revenue in ways that we don't even talk about today because we just don't have the opportunity to do it. So, and as Nikki's kind of highlighted in a number of areas throughout the financial forecast, there are places that, off the top of our heads, Home Rule would have the ability to immediately make changes to, but there are also creative approaches that we haven't done a lot in terms of thought process to create those that could be unique to a specific need.
Just, the theory behind a lot of this stuff is I'm kind of a fee for service guy. And, to the extent we can get positive results with a little bit of investment, that makes a lot of sense. On the other hand, if we can tie the fees for the service, that I think helps us better understand the value to the community.
Yeah. Okay.
Moving on, I apologize again, this is small on the screen, but it is in the packet. On the general fund revenue side, just a couple things I want to point out. There were several fee increases that we'll be bringing forth to the board in November. Those have been rolled into the forecast. You'll see a recommendation on building permits, parking fees, the garbage service fee, and the sewer charge we already mentioned. Vehicle licenses is another one that we've talked about. Packet page. Very end. This is packet page 77. So those have all been rolled in. One thing I wanted to highlight with the vehicle sticker license or the vehicle licenses, we are evaluating a virtual program. We talked about that previously at a different finance committee. That will be incorporated into the goals of a number of departments next year to evaluate that program, the cost of providing it. We will proceed in spring with the traditional, normal vehicle sticker program that you're used to. But we are recommending a fee increase to cover that cost, so that you'll see that that revenue has been hovering around $230, $220. We bumped that up to $250 with the assumed fee increase, which is where we've been trying to target that revenue all along. We have seen the number of licenses purchased go down. I don't believe that the number of registered vehicles are down. I think we just have a different compliance rate. So that's going to be one of the things that we consider as part of the 2024 budget goals as to how we enhance that compliance and just a different way of achieving that same goal. This revenue is important because it does go straight to the maintenance of our roads. It is something that we rely on. So definitely want to look at that next year.
Did we ever find out if we can get something from the Secretary of State in terms of the vehicles that are registered here so that we can match up against our records and go, hey, getting a license plate tag, you owe us.
We are able to do that, and I've actually had a very in-depth conversation. The city of Evanston does this every year. There's a few bumps in the road because the Secretary of State's office records shockingly are not always completely up to date. I think they're making strides in that. They're trying to make improvements in that. But that is something that we would plan to incorporate
I mean,
within our process.
just from a historical context standpoint, we did do that in 2016 and it was an absolute nightmare.
Mhm.
Their data
Hope
was
it's better now.
almost wholly different than ours, to the point at which we had residents coming in saying, I haven't owned that car in 7 years. Why did I get a vehicle license application for it? So yes, it should be better in 2024 than it was in 2016, but I look at it askance a bit.
Okay.
So just something for you to be aware of from a historical context.
This
Yeah,
is
because
one of
it's a pretty significant number right now that seems that we're leaving on the table.
It is, and I will say this is one of the benefits of working for a municipal government, that there are no secrets. People are willing to share the tricks of the trade, and this is definitely something we want to learn from Evanston of how they're handling this, and what their experience has been, because it sounds like they're doing this every year, updating those records and staying on top of it. So.
I will say we have stepped up enforcement as well, so that is something that the community service officers and public safety have been working a bit more at, which you can imagine is less than a popular action on our part, but there are, to Nikki's point, a number of vehicles that have for many years been renewed and then suddenly fall off. And so it's a process of being mindful.
The expenditures,
Sure.
sure.
And then you mentioned a couple times, see a building permit, maybe fee structure proposal to be changed next month, right? I'm curious, and we've also talked a little bit earlier about this, the garbage contract for LRS, their fees are going up, the impact that these vehicles have on our streets, I don't know if we do this, and forgive me if we do, and I just don't know, I haven't pulled a building permit in a while. Do we charge, what they call an impact fee for just larger construction projects, like homes and, larger development? Because some villages do, I don't know if we do.
We are not able to,
Is it 'cause
as
it's
a
annual?
non-municipal unit.
Put it on the list.
To try to get around the fact that we don't have the ability to do that, when we did a comprehensive update to the building permit fee structure in 2019, we increased the building permit fees to try to grasp at some of that. Admittedly, you know, there's a number of those types of impacts that are significant, particularly when we talk about the scale of some of the residential construction projects that we have in the community. You just see more trucks than a typical suburban infill construction project might have. So that is something that I think we could look at more closely in a different environment. We are talking about a modest, if I am remembering, is it a 3% bump in our single family new residential construction number. If you remember, Glencoe's structure is somewhat unique in that we roll our entire fee for new construction into a per square foot dollar amount. Neighboring communities like Winnetka don't do that, but they have 15 other fees that get rolled in. And so when we do it, one of the things we'll show you when we get to the fee and fine recommendations during the budget process is just kind of, again, where we stand among our neighboring communities for trying to, you know, standardize against a house if it were built in Glencoe, Winnetka, Wilmette, Kenilworth, Highland Park. We have generally been in the top 3 in terms of cost for those permits. I think that remains true at this point. No doubt, I mean, our costs for permit review have gone up. We have a contractual arrangement, as you may remember, with HR Green for plan review and inspection services. The cost of that contract has gone up substantially over the past couple of years. One of the things we're going to be evaluating next year, which is the last year of a 3-year agreement with them, is whether some adjustment to the way we've been doing that since about 2017 is warranted. And by that, I mean, is it less expensive for us to in-house some of that versus contracting? And when we did it originally, the opposite was true. And we gained quite a bit of skill and ability, but then a number of those staff members at HR Green have turned over. And so with that turnover have come to some degree lesser skill sets at a higher price point. So it's something we don't want to leave, but it's going to be an evaluation that we do during the course of 2024. We want to be conscious, particularly, you know, the Preservation Commission has made recommendations that for certain homes, perhaps a different fee structure would be appropriate. That's another component that we're continuing to evaluate up against what our actual costs are. So that'll be something that during the course of 2024 we'll also be looking at. But yeah, we've tried to streamline the new home construction fee structure to be as understandable as possible. But that one particular component we don't have the ability to impose.
And given what's going on with construction costs, our building fee, our building permits, I mean, it's not nothing, but our building permits are a tiny component
Relatively.
of the cost of that home that's being built, if it's new. So I don't think we have to be embarrassed if our costs have gone up by trying to recover them.
Could I mention on the building permit fees, I'm not positive this is the time, but last year or the year before, because of the perpetual permanent construction contract, we had increased the cost of extensions.
Yeah.
There continue to be, I happen to live near one, perfectly lovely people, but they think they're building the Taj Mahal and they're never going to finish. should we be increasing more to get people, I mean, because it's, you know, we've gotten complaints from people because they don't like living next to permanent construction projects, and it's disheartening when you see a house goes up in 6 months and, you know, they're in, and then the other house is just a perpetual project.
We'll talk to Taylor about,
Okay.
you know, where we are in terms, I can't speak to the specifics as to the number of permit extensions that, and there are no doubt, I can think of probably 5 in town that do seem like they are the never-ending construction projects. But what we'll do is we'll get a sense of how meaningful that is and whether there are other increases that we may want to look
You know,
at.
maybe it's just shorten the time for which the extension is good, and then if you kick over it, pay up again.
Yeah.
So that it just encourages people, get it over with.
I think the extensions are only for 6-month windows.
But maybe
It
it
is,
should
I'm looking
be,
at
but
it.
maybe it should be 3. I mean, in other words, you've already used the time.
Yeah, 15 months is the initial permit duration.
And maybe it should be 3 months and then 2 months and then, you know, just,
Well,
so-
we do have to be somewhat mindful of the fact that we are still in an environment of supply chain impacts.
I totally get that. I bet with respect to we're talking about very few, but
Generally, you're right.
but it doesn't seem like, it doesn't matter if it's few to the people who are living near it. And by the way, you know, I don't care. They're not on top of me, but there are people that are next door, and, you know, we get inquiries. Can you do something about this? And the answer is, yeah, we sort of can. So why don't we think about doing it?
I just want to echo what I said before. Let's make sure we cover our costs on that. And, you know, we're part of my career in California, talk about impact fees. I mean, we're talking $10,000, $20,000 or
Yeah.
more.
Those are dreams for us. The village just, I mean, even when we get to the Hoover estate at some point, hopefully the construction to take place there, the village has no ability to levy an impact fee. So there will be, you know, could be up to 29 new homes there. The benefit to the village is the building permit revenue that comes in off of those. Whereas both the park district and school district, because the state provides those in statute, will each have an individual impact fee for each of those homes that are put up. So, you know, it is, I think that's another example of an area where the village does not, we exert as much as we would were we a home rule community and receive significantly less because we're not home rule.
Question, go ahead. Oh, no, again, because I haven't pulled a building permit in a while, not that I didn't work without a permit, but just. For the record, we did.
It's been noted, yeah.
I can't remember what we paid, it was, I think it was 3% of our.
Yeah, so renovations,
Whatever, based on the stated value that the applicant provides. And I'm curious, does the village actually review that stated value and then adjust the stated value to what's more realistic? And then apply the fee to the village's like peer reviewed values?
On the renovation side, it's somewhat of the honor system. They do have to provide an official cost estimate. I mean, could that be modified? Of course. That is what a lot of our surrounding communities base their building permits on as well. With the revision of our building permit structure, it was in 2019. We moved new construction to a per square foot basis to make sure that there's no
Dollar value that we've
variation.
assigned
Mhm.
for that year based on whatever studies we've done.
Yeah, that being said, that's something we'll circle back with Taylor on, just to confirm process with respect to the renovation and the percent of construction value. And I'll say renovation is a much higher number than it had been. I think we're seeing that particularly as home prices have increased and people are not as mobile within the community. Fewer homes are on the market. So there's definitely a lot more investment in existing homes than there perhaps had been leading into it. But we'll double check on that.
Moving on to the expenditure side of things, so we talked a little bit about cost of living. We have placeholders in the 2024 budget and in the out years. Ultimately, we will have a comprehensive personnel report that will be presented to the board in November with all of our recommendations, cost of living, any new positions or any changes that we're recommending. Generally, assuming modest increases for benefits in the out years. The police pension contribution is programmed in accordance with the model that we paid our actuary for. That incorporates some of our funding policy changes where we're moving to an open amortization period, trying to pay down that unfunded liability. I will note that every year we conduct a full actuarial evaluation based off of the current census. So we've seen very modest increases over the past few years because we've had vacancies. As we're getting to full staffing, we'll see that contribution really ramp up. So that'll reset. The good news is it resets every year, and the bad news is it resets every year. But that helps us catch up on that unfunded liability. A couple things that are still pending review. As Phil mentioned earlier, we're still reviewing the capital plan, kind of refining those numbers, making sure that we have realistic numbers based off of the best information that we have today for the next 10 years. What's programmed into the forecast right now are the numbers that we have in the draft CIP, and we'll still work through those before they come before you in November. Another item that's still pending is community grants. That'll be based off of the recommendation from the community grants subcommittee. And we'll program those final numbers in once those are complete. And just one other thing I wanted to note at the very bottom, it's tiny, but you can see the fund balance projections and what percentage they are in operating. 2024, as we noted, we have kind of been building the surplus up, projecting to end the year at a 63% surplus, or I'm sorry, reserve fund. And then by 28, drawing those funds down to 26%. Every year we do this 5-year forecast, we update the numbers, it changes for better, sometimes for worse. But this is our opportunity to kind of have a bellwether system. If we see any warnings, this is where we would call it out to you. We can change course to prevent something bad from happening out in that 5-year period.
The one thing I'll say that as we're looking at the CIP, and you'll see this next month when we present it as part of the budget, we are working hard to make sure that the numbers that we have in the CIP, particularly in the out years, reflect as best as we can project what the costs of those projects are going to be, so that we are building a revenue stream or a projected revenue stream that will actually cover the costs of those projects. That's difficult in this environment. We're still kind of feeling around in the dark with some of it. We can base certain things off of what we've seen the last couple of years. There's a real question about the stickiness of some of these price increases that we have seen. Will we start to see the price of PVC and the price of, bless you, and the price of concrete and the price of asphalt move up or down based off of, the changes in the environment? I don't know. It's hard to guess. But what we do know is that we probably haven't done enough in past years to adjust those numbers in the out years to better reflect what those investments may be. The other thing, especially as we're looking at the water fund and the water rate structure, is that we know that water main replacement is getting more expensive,
Mhm.
but we're also seeing that we're gonna have to start looking at our distribution system analysis again, to make sure that we have a good sense of what we're gonna have to invest in where. The data that we have today is pretty good. It's continuing to be updated by Public Works based off of the breaks that we're seeing and where those breaks are. But the distribution system analysis was completed in 2015. We're getting to almost a decade since that work was done. When the new Public Works Director gets here next week, she's got such a laundry list of things. One of the things we're going to talk about is how we can update some of the condition analysis of our entire infrastructure network. We are going to be budgeting next year to do a pavement analysis again. We know we're going to have to do some of our sanitary and storm analysis again. We know we're going to have to continue to monitor our water system from the standpoint of internal leaks, and where we may need to prioritize some of those investments. So the CIP, while it is a very good tool of projecting what we anticipate, we think it can get better. And so we're going to continue to line up data sets that can be stacked on top of one another so that we, as we look out into the 10, 15 years ahead of us, we're making sure that we're putting the resources where they need to be as effectively as we can and within reason too. I think that the other struggle that we're going to have is we will always have more than we can afford to do. And so how do we make sure we're reshuffling the deck where is necessary so that we are continuing to invest? I will tell you, for a long time, the village did not invest enough in our water distribution system. We really started to change that when we updated the distribution system analysis, which was followed up by the rate analysis in 2016 and 17, and then started to implement the new rate system that's in place. But we're going to pay in the future for not investing in that component of our infrastructure. When I got here 10 years ago, we were investing about $100,000 to $150,000 a year in water main replacements. That even at that time was getting us, a block to 2 blocks worth of main replacement in the whole community. Well, we've got, dozens of miles of mains in town. And so we are continuing to make sure that if that acceleration has to happen, we can pay for it. So, and that's also, contemplating what sort of interim and long-term investments we may need to make just to keep the water plant functional within its current envelope. So I will tell you, some of the CIP may look different to you next month. As we build out this 10-year window, you should expect that it's going to be bigger than it has been in the past. It'll also obviously be inclusive of things like the clubhouse and the projects that we kind of were hoping we were going to be able to do the last time we built the CIP out for your review, and now we are doing. So it will feel somewhat different. It will feel heavier. There's no doubt. It will be bigger. Yeah.
So, in the past, when we've heard this a couple of times, that we didn't invest enough in our infrastructure. Is that because, let's say we didn't know we had to invest in some stuff because we didn't do the proper analysis at the right time, or maybe we didn't have enough staff to think about to do analysis or whatever at the time, or did staff present that we should have been doing some things and the board said, no, cut that in half? Like, how did that?
I think if you look back,
And
if
what I'm
you look
trying to
back,
say is what I would love to see is you guys have to tell us.
Yeah.
We have to do all our homework, and we hope that you guys have the resources you need to do all the homework so that we can see, we have our 5-year forecast, we have our 10-year CIP. I would hope that you guys think, you have the people you need to do the reports, the new analysis of the distributions, so you can tell us to make the right decisions at the right time. It's kind of just
I would say,
Then maybe doesn't mean, I don't need to know what happened then, but.
no, all I will say is I
We're
think
on the right path.
it's a mix.
Sounds like we're on the right
It's a mix from during the last, if we want to look back about the last 50 years, I think it was probably a mix of what the board was willing to find resources to do. And then I think there was a concerted effort by both staff and board to do as much as we could with as little as possible or as necessary. I don't necessarily look back at it and say somebody did the wrong thing.
That's not what I'm saying.
No, right, I know you're
I
not.
was just-
I think what we know though is that as we continue to get better at pulling data and being aware, and using the village hall as an example. So, this building was built and we moved into it in 1956. There have been a few renovations of the first floor. The most recent one was finished in 2007. But there are a lot of areas in this building that we haven't invested in. The council chambers, which we talked about last month, hasn't had any appreciable investment in 30 plus years. We know that the public safety living quarters space up on the second floor really hasn't been touched probably in any appreciable way in the last 50 years. There are spaces in the lower level, and then there are operational components of the building that we've delayed and deferred. I can't speak to exactly why we've done that, but I do know that what you'll see in the budget for 2024 is that we are going to try to do some of those things, not just on the second floor and the kind of the interior spaces, but tuck pointing and painting and ensuring that this building, which frankly, while a lot of people may not care one way or another, is the seat of government in this community. It is the home of all of the operating departments. The people that are here have to have spaces that are functional, and we don't want leaky roofs, and we don't want electrical systems that blow fuses all the time. And at the same time, we want to make sure that we're not overly investing at the expense of something else. But all of our infrastructure, when you look at the magnitude of what we have as a relatively modest sized community, we also have to remind ourselves that we're a 155-year-old community, and a lot of this stuff gets old real fast. And if we don't do the work to make sure that you have the data and the information that you need for us all to figure out how to invest in it appropriately and step it out, right? Not everything can be done at once. Not everything should be. I do think, though, as we look at it, there are questions that the home rule question helped to answer. The duration of the debt is a big one, right? As a non-home rule community, we are absolutely locked that nothing can be longer than a 20-year term. There are some things, not admittedly a lot of them, but there are some things that as we look at water infrastructure and we look at sewer infrastructure, that perhaps something longer than a 20-year debt repayment cycle may be appropriate. A building may have a more appropriate debt life than 20 years because they have usable lives that are longer than that. I don't think that's true if you're talking about a vehicle, right? You wouldn't want a 40-year payment cycle on a fire truck because you're gonna replace it in 15. So I think the work that Nikki does to try to lay out a financing plan over 10 years has limitations built into it that the environment that we're in, both from a timing standpoint, when can we go to referendum? How significant can the referendum be if we seek a larger than X number bond issue? What does that mean? We have a smaller box to work within. And I think as we look at some of what we're going to talk about with the CIP, there are useful lives of our infrastructure that we're living with today that are at the 70, 80, 90-year mark, particularly as we're talking about underground infrastructure.
Yeah.
So how do we best pay for those kinds of long-term infrastructure investments so that all of us sitting in the room who may be here for the next 20 years pay for those benefits, even though they extend 40 to 50 years past the time we're done paying for them. So it's a multitude of pieces and parts. We want and we will do more to get better data. And on the other side of it, as we're looking at how to pay for it, I think being able to be flexible with some of that, some of those timelines will be important for us to be able to afford it. Because sometimes when you have short repayment cycles, it's just too significant to do too much. So anyway.
One thing I would just add to that, going back to your question, is I also think there was a general feeling, a general desire to keep fees down. And when you do artificially deflate those fees, and costs continue to rise, you can only do so much, it restricts you. The year before I started, we implemented the rates from the rate study. And there was a rate study done, it was 2017, I believe.
Yeah, it was, presented in
The
2017.
first year, when we looked at comparison of where Glencoe was compared to the surrounding communities, we were extremely low. And I believe it was a 25% rate jump just in the first year, just to get us jump started to where we needed to be at that time. And then throughout the rate study, there were 9, 8, 7% increases each year just to be able to cover the cost of that infrastructure. And I think that's what's different today versus what happened previously is we are, to Phil's point, thinking about how those costs are escalating and how can we afford it, and prioritizing the investments that need to be made so that you're not doing everything at once and we're in the same situation, 20, 30 years from now. That's a perfect segue into the water fund.
Let me just say one thing
Sure.
before you're doing a segue. I think all of the elected members, when we went to the caucus, we got, okay, what are you gonna do? And the answer is, we said, I'm sure all of us, we're doing the infrastructure here. We're not. And I remember when I was on the caucus, I used to ask a hypothetical. I said, if you have to raise taxes or do the infrastructure, which one of those? And if somebody said, oh, we're not raising taxes, thank you, goodbye. So we're doing the infrastructure, period, full stop. I haven't seen a village board member said anything different in 40 years. There was a time that I did see it, but that's over. Second thing I'll say is about the fees. Prior to the elimination of the SALT tax deduction, which has cost a lot of us mightily, there was a good argument that we should pay for stuff through property taxes rather than fees because it was subsidized.
Right.
And it was kind of progressive in terms of so the wealthier people paid more, but that's over too. So now, and it's subject to a miracle, the SALT thing coming back, which would help all of us, but it's not happening. We're going to have to look at fees because the reason not to use fees is gone. So if we have to look at fees, okay, it's paid for, but the answer, but I'm happy to defend to any of the residents, we're doing the infrastructure, period. That's why they live here because there are good schools, because we have great employees, and because the town works. And we're doing that, period.
With that being said, we are recommending in the financial forecast to increase fees. There is a chart in the financial forecast. I just want to note that depending on when you read the forecast, the initial packet had incorrect numbers. So those have been updated. If you look at the electronic packet now, it's all been
We
updated.
updated those on Monday. So
Yes.
if you looked at them before Monday.
Yes, it might look confusing. So, if you recall, when we went through the pandemic and the federal government gave us a lot of federal funding, we had an influx of cash into the water fund to do the Skokie Lagoon transmission main. The completion of that work alleviated the need to have that transmission main in the 10-year CIP and also allowed us to extend the replacement of the water tower. So that's now outside of the window of the 10-year CIP. And that's kind of changed what we're looking at in terms of funding. Now, at the same time, to Phil's point, we've also seen the cost of water main improvements creep up. When we were in the situation of the pandemic, not knowing the impact of our residents, how the financial impact was going to be, we opted to increase water rates at less than what the water rate study had recommended, understanding that we were deferring some of the capital, and that we had this influx of federal funding. So in the chart, in the financial forecast, you'll see what was recommended by the rate study and what staff has recommended. As a temporary stopgap, we worked on our own internal model to try and update for those things that have changed, where our current staffing level expenditures are, where the operating expenditures are, forecasting those out 10 to 15 years, plus whatever we're projecting as CIP and what the rate structure needs to be to sustain that. So this year, where staff is recommending is actually in line with what the rate study had recommended originally. It's at a 7% for 2024. And then as we move forward, each year we'll reevaluate that. One of the things that you'll see come before you as a 2024 budget recommendation is going to do an updated water rate study. Although I think we have good solid numbers and I believe in our staff and hopefully my own work, it'll be beneficial to have someone from outside come in and just make sure we haven't missed anything and just verify those numbers. So we will plan to update that next year with everything that has changed, just to make sure we're still on track. As Phil noted, we talked about quite a bit. There are some significant expenditures that are programmed into the 10-year CIP. Typically, what we have done is fund those improvements with a combination of fund balance aggregated by the water rate increases and then alternate revenue bonds, which are financed and repaid back by the operations of the water fund, with the idea of it being generally self-sustaining. It doesn't hit the property tax levy. To President Rowan's point, it's all user-based. So that's something that will be updated as we refine these numbers. We'll bring that back before you with the 10-year CIP plan and update those alternate revenue bond issues that we anticipate over the next 5 years.
The only thing I'd add real quick to that, Nikki, we have one remaining rather large EPA loan that the village utilized to replace a large water main on Sheridan Road back, I believe, in 2012. I think it was the year before I got here. It's a 20-year loan, if my memory serves. Given the fact that it's gotten a bit more expensive to utilize bond resources than it had been, we're going to take another look at whether those EPA loans, which are historically very low interest rates, whether they remain as such, we don't know. But we're going to generally it has not been in our interest to utilize those programs because with a AAA rating,
Right.
our bond costs were less than the loan costs. That may or may not still be true. So we're going to take another look at that just to see whether that's another source of funding that we may want to evaluate.
And that may be something that's an option to fund certain programs. There is a lead service line, low interest loan program. So we can look at kind of splitting that, how we would finance each of those. In the water fund projection itself, it's on packet page 78. Right now, the CIP as it exists today, we're planning on issuing alternate revenue bonds again in 2026. I believe this has been accelerated from last year's plan, where we were anticipating issuing in 27. So because the cost of water mains has gone up, our money is not going as far as what we had originally hoped. In the water fund, with rates programmed out for the next 5 years, we would still maintain in 2028 a 24% fund balance. Again, we do need to update these numbers. So we'll bring back an updated forecast for you with the 2024 budget. So same charts will be updated with the budget that we're recommending before you for 24, so you'll see the impact of whatever you approve or do not approve for 2024. You'll see the impact throughout the 5-year forecast as well. Let's see. Okay, the last fund in the forecast is motor fuel tax fund. Smallest, less complicated fund in the forecast. We are anticipating a dip in gas tax revenues. This is coming right from the state, the Illinois Municipal League, and what they're projecting with the increased use of electric vehicles, expecting that to drop off a little bit. We do impose a modest local fuel tax on our gas station in town. For a small gas station, it does fairly well, and it's a nice addition to the motor fuel tax fund. Next year, we'll be recommending some crosswalk improvements out of this fund, and as Phil mentioned, kind of a redo of our pavement index. And then after that, the forecast kind of returns to the assumption that we'll go back to the financing perspective where every third year we do a larger street program. And that comes out of referendum dollars and splits some of the MFT resources as well, just to supplement that program so we can do more with that. And again, nothing to dismiss easily. It's almost $1.7 million of funding that will supplement our road program. So how are we paying for all this? Our debt. This is, again, I will caution everyone, this is pending final CIP review. This chart shows our existing debt service summary, and you can see in years as some of our existing debt drops off, we do, wherever we can, try to slot in new bond issues where others drop off. It does minimize the impact of radical swings in the property tax levy. Go ahead.
With regard, sorry to interrupt, but with regard to this chart, REF 2020. So that's the big chunk that seems to drop off in 2028?
Yes, so that was the refunding bond issue. It was originally issued in 2012. When that bond was originally structured, it included a large balloon payment at the end with a call feature purposefully, because I believe when it was originally issued, it was at a higher interest rate. So one of the things I think I did that issue, right? So in the last 5 years, we did in 2020, we refunded that issue, lowered the interest rate, and spread out that balloon payment over the last, I don't know, 5 to 8 years of the
That's right. I just didn't remember the details as to why that
It is
went down
large.
so fast.
Yeah,
It's
and it
not
is
I thought it was referendum 2020.
Yeah, and I was like,
It's
I don't
refund.
remember, yeah, I don't remember that, yeah, okay.
Mhm.
Yeah, we took
Thank you.
advantage of those very, very
Thank
low
you.
rates
Yes,
at that
I
point. I
remember.
think we shaved $400,000
Yeah.
off the cost of that
Yeah, it
bond
was a good
issuance.
deal.
Yeah.
Whatever.
It was a good deal at the
And it
time.
also, by 2028, opens up some
It does.
space.
You'll notice our debt limit has jumped quite a bit. This was 90 million last year. Our debt limit is based off of our EAV, so that'll give you an indication as to where our EAV has gone year over year. And why we're very cautious with the numbers that we get from the county, because they can get a little wild. By no means are we recommending extending 100 million in bonds, but we are very, very much below that limit. Right now, we have 27.5 million in GO debt outstanding and 1.8 million in the IEPA loan that Phil was mentioning earlier. Our current annual payment is at 3.1 million. Historically, the high payment, we have this high water mark that was established in 2008. That we kind of adjust every year for CPI. And in today's dollar, that high water mark would have been 3.5 million. So we are still below our high water mark, even with the debt that we have outstanding as of today. One other financing authority that we haven't really talked about is the village's limited tax debt. The last time we used that was in 2019 to complete the Tudor Court Street improvements. Just a reminder that debt is an allocation that's given to us as a non-home rule authority by the state of Illinois. They set the formula for how that's determined. And that's essentially based off of, I think, a population and there's an escalator, an annual escalator that's in that. What the state does is give you a limited taxing bond authority. You have to subtract out any outstanding bonds that you have issued under that authority. And that gives us 4.8 million in remaining limited tax authority. Traditionally, this has been used for emergency use or one-time projects. And again, the last time we used that was in 2019.
Yeah, that was the Tudor Court project. This, I will say, this is a resource we could tap into for a large piece of equipment if we wanted to do so. I don't know that we would recommend that, but as you look at, a fire engine and or even ambulances. I mean, I think our fire engine, we say 1 million, but it's probably going to be closer to 1.5 million. Ambulances, which had historically been in the neighborhood of 500,000 to 600,000, are now approaching $1 million. Large pieces of equipment in the Public Works Department, jet vacs and Vactors, are $500,000. So these pieces of rolling stock, as they grow in price, we may look to something like this. The thing Nikki and I have also been talking about, but we need to find a way to fund it initially, is the creation of a dedicated vehicle and equipment replacement fund that does not necessarily bind the general fund in the same way, but you can't start it from zero. So if the village were to have a windfall of $1 million to $2 million, yeah, that may be a source to create something like that. And then you budget on an annual basis the depreciation for everything that fund is, and the general fund refunds that. It limits. It's kind of the same idea as the general fund reserve, but with a little bit more structure. It may or may not be the right thing, but that's something we're always looking at too, as a means of smoothing out those impacts when we know we have those big rolling stock, particularly investments that we need to make. So just something to be mindful of.
Think about starting back with like, let's say the Hoover property comes in, we're gonna have a lot of, not planned for building permit fees. Could that chunk start?
It could, and we did propose that back in 21, once the subdivision was approved, and what we recommended at the time was that the village set those funds aside because they were one-time revenues that we would not likely see again at one time. When the project kind of was put on ice, that policy was likewise put on ice. I think if the project were to get started again, we would make the same recommendation that we kind of set those dollars aside because they would be one-time unique revenues for us.
We'll check, but I believe that clause might still be
Is
in
it
the
still
fund
in?
balance
I
policy.
think you're right, yeah.
So it does allow the board to make that reservation of funds for any one-time extreme revenues. Okay, pension funding. So we talked a little bit about this. You can see the trending of our pension funding over time, and where we're projecting it to go, obviously upwards. Our required contribution in 24 is just over 2.7 million. And the forecast includes those recommendations by the fund policy. I will say, we still have yet to realize much savings from the consolidation of all the investments. We're still kind of waiting for that to get up and going. The pension fund itself has seen a drop in administrative expenses just because we're not paying the administrative fees ourselves. But that is still gonna take a few more years to get up and going, to be a little bit more efficient, and a little bit more aggressive in where they're invested. A lot of it's still in index funds. The other thing that I just wanna note, is that our pension contributions could also increase, not only from coming up to full staffing, but also, where the market goes, how successful or unsuccessful the consolidation is going forward. Because anytime we don't hit that investment return mark, we do have to make that up in the following year. And that's smoothed over kind of a 3-year period. But there's also a bill pending downstate to enhance tier 2 pensions, and you may have heard about that, we may have talked about it already. But depending on where that goes, that would also roll into the actuary's valuation, and would increase our liability going out. As we are hiring new officers, we have a larger percentage of tier 2 officers. We're getting farther and farther away from the start date of tier 1, as much as I don't want to admit that it was 2011 and that's far, like a long time ago. It is a long time ago now. So a lot of the officers that we're hiring on, even the laterals, are tier 2. So to the extent that those benefits are increased, that would also increase our contributions.
This is something, Nikki and I are both on the legislative committee with the Northwest Municipal Conference, and so we've been talking about this quite a bit. The concern is that, you know, the work that was done back in 2010 that led to the pension reforms in 2011 broke the pension program into 2 pieces. So tier 1 remained as it had been structured. Tier 2 was a kind of looking ahead. So everyone who started post, I believe it was January 1st of 2011. Had different levels of benefit applied. Interestingly, there's been so much turnover in Springfield since 2011. There's virtually no one remaining in the General Assembly who was in the General Assembly at that time. And what we're finding is that there's some opportunities being taken to redefine the historical record as to why those modifications were made at that time. The most critical reason was that pension funds were looking at the potential of being insolvent. But for the modifications being made. Don't forget, though, the last several years have seen, you know, record health of the state of Illinois' financial situation. And anytime the finances of the state start to look better, there are perspectives that now may be the time to do some things that feel good. So we've been monitoring this. We don't know whether it has legs, but it's very possible that you could see essentially tier 2 benefits revert to tier 1. So drop the retirement age, drop the years of service.
That compounding increases.
Put those compounding increases back in. So we're working on putting information together that we're sharing with the conference. Nobody wants to remove pension benefits by any means. But what we are concerned about is that if we do this full reversion, we are going to be among the communities all throughout the state that are going to see dramatic increases in our pension costs and pension liabilities. And frankly, all of the planning that this body has done to be in the position that we're in may be erased because those liabilities are going to skyrocket.
So we wrote to our legislators saying, don't do this. Should I take it as a bad sign that I heard back from nobody?
Maybe.
When would this kick in?
Hard to say. I think the legislation would be prospective at some point, but we're in the veto session next week. No, sorry, in early November. So, you know, could be January 1st. I don't think it will be because there's a lot of impact, but you do have, you know, there's a lot of conversation going on around it. And again, nobody wants to take what's been promised. I think when the reforms went through, there was a lot of agreement around the table that those reforms were necessary. A lot of those people are gone. And it's interesting, you know, 12 years goes by and a lot of memory walks out the door, and those impacts can have sweeping problems for a number of frankly, all of the pension funds will suffer from it. So anyway, as I said, Nikki and I got a meeting tomorrow morning that I am unable to attend, but the legislative committee is very actively approaching this. Lobbyists and things of that
If
nature.
we, like I said, if we should go back, I mean, if we should go back to our reps, say, hey, we're not kidding, cut it out.
Yeah, I'm anticipating we're gonna get some communication tomorrow that we can then rebrand for
So
ourselves.
I was surprised that we didn't. Usually I get a thank you or something,
Yeah.
but dead silence.
We might be getting on the phone.
Okay.
Sometimes it's
You
easier.
know, really, I mean, by the way, once it's done, it's permanent.
Right,
Because of the
because Constitution, you can't take it back.
So it's like.
It's a one-way ratchet.
That's why the reforms were as important as they were at the time, because you couldn't look back. So
Okay. Well,
anyway,
so I-
it's just a threat that's out there that, we want to make sure you're aware of.
Is this sort of another one of the, instead of just paying people more now, they're just mortgaging the future without paying for it, because the pension funds aren't fully funded. I mean, we're at what, 80-ish% or something?
65.
65%, and we're one of the better ones. And we installed this new program to try to catch up.
Yeah.
To get to 80. That was why I had that moment. To get
That's
to
right.
80 faster than is required, and hopefully save the village a lot of money in the long run by doing it. But the other funds in the state aren't even at that level, and they're just sort of like, I'm sorry, you're actually broke, and now you're going to be even, more in debt.
Broker.
There's got to be other things you can do that are cheaper and more current,
Well, I mean,
and a benefit if you want to give these people a benefit. They're not quibbling with what they deserve.
Right.
without
But
doubt,
doing this just is crazy.
And there's an argument out there that the unions are presenting that tier 2 as structured will not meet the safe harbor requirements, right? That the income would be too low when you project it out. But there's also an equal argument on the other side that that's been verified to be false. So to Phil's point, I think there's a lot of opportunistic.
there's some retrenching going on
Yes.
that is pushing down a different path. And, the struggle is that not all pension plans in the state are created equal. There are a number of different structures. Tier 2 applied to all of them except for, I'm trying to remember which one, not that it matters, but this wouldn't apply equally across all of them. This is really just the police and fire structures. So that's another kind of equalizing factor. The Public Works Department is an IMRF structure. Nobody's talking about making changes to that. And so that's always kind of been a struggle, just across employee groups. So long story short, it's ongoing. We don't know how serious it is. It's certainly serious enough that we are taking it very seriously. And it seems as though it has gained some traction, but whether it proceeds through the veto session or it waits until the session after the first of the year will be hard to know, but we'll find out very soon.
And as a non-home rule community, if they change it, we have no ability to have any extra increase in property taxes.
I would
To pay
say
for any of it.
the one thing, and we didn't necessarily point to it specifically here, but see, our required pension contribution of 2.7 million, our levy, if you remember, is 1.5.
Yeah.
And, the village has always made its pension contribution it's required pension contributions. And what we have done is thankfully we have other revenue streams that we're able to tap into to ensure that we're doing that. And we would continue to do so. It would erode our ability to utilize perhaps some of those funds for capital or for other operating needs. So there's no doubt that it would push that, required contribution up. How substantially, we would only know that once we had a sense of what the legislation would entail. But yes, we are capped on our pension our pension levy.
Because of the various, these are the things that could go south on us, provisions and this, which again, very well thought out and very helpful. This is the one that scares me the most.
Yeah. Yeah, a lot of the threats that we had been historically talking about, looking back even 4 or 5 years ago, the concept of property tax freezes. No one's talking about that stuff anymore, right? Thankfully. But again, the threats are always out there. They just take different forms. That's where I think as we continue to look at this, us understanding and then, being able to react if that were to be a situation that we're now dealing with becomes particularly important. It really does change the forecasting in a big way.
Thank you.
Sorry about that.
It's all her fault.
I'm sorry that we have to end on that.
Blame Nikki.
So next steps, we will take the feedback that we got from today, and we'll be incorporating this into the development of the draft budget, making sure that we answer the questions that were outlined today. We will be presenting fee recommendations in November, along with the entire operating capital budget. And at this point, happy to answer any questions, any other questions on the forecast.
You're in the room. Thank you. Thank you to everybody that, this literally affects virtually, so many people in the building to put this together, along with your department. So I really appreciate the thoughtfulness, the thoroughness of the presentation. And while we can't control all the moving pieces, at least we have a sense of where we're likely to be going and what our immediate responses might be if we get hit in the side of the head with something like that. So that's good, which is one of the reasons why 25% is silly. And it actually needs to be higher, because one change like that, and it's like wipes that out. So home rule, I think it's been said 1,000 times. It deserves to be said 1,000 times again, and we really do put a plan together to get this on the ballot.
Do you have any questions for us? You received all the feedback you guys needed, you and Bill?
Yeah, I think and up until this point, as much as we needed,
Yeah.
I think Phil might have something.
No,
else,
I
but-
don't. The only thing I wanted to say is I did send out an updated calendar invitation this evening for the Finance Committee in November. What we're going to try to do is, and what we have historically done was have the Finance Committee meeting on Tuesday night and then reserve the Committee of the Whole for additional time for budget review. What we're going to try to do is we booked 4 hours to try to get through the whole budget if we can in one evening, because it does sound like the ad hoc design review committee is going to want to make some presentations and recommendations relative to the clubhouse. And we may need that time at the committee of the whole. So what I had proposed is that we start that meeting at 5, which is a bit earlier than we normally do, obviously, and try to wrap by 9, because I think all of us start to turn into pumpkins around that time. But that the staff would then present the budget, we'd present the capital plan, we talk about our revenues and projections for the coming year. And then that's, the opportunity for discussion and dialogue. If that seems like it works okay, that's what we'll plan for. We may have a placeholder on the Committee of the Whole agenda for the budget, and if we don't need it, then we just will, we will move past that item. But I think we could probably get through the budget. We're gonna try to streamline the presentation a little bit, to.
That's why it's only 4 hours.
Well, hopefully it's gonna be less than that. I'm just, I'm giving ourselves a little bit of a wiggle room space there, but that's the idea, is that we'll present that to you that night. It's our expectation that the budgets are gonna come out to you, the 7th or 8th. I think it's the 8th.
I appreciate the concept,
Yep, I think you're right.
and I think we all do, including yourselves, of efficiency of the meeting. This is an important one that we're talking about, and there are a lot of things, a lot of moving pieces. So on the one hand, efficiency is great, but we want you to take the time you need to tell us what you think we need to know and get feedback.
Understood.
Thank you.
And just as a reminder, we will, Trustee Rubin, you'll still chair the finance committee meeting, but that is also a meeting that we invite the entire village board to. So,
No way.
I know. Maybe make him sit outside. I will also say, my hope is that we're gonna be in this room. It gets crowded in here, so staff may kind of cycle in and out. I would say we use the council chambers, but it's just not, the screens are too far away. We would
Right,
sit on the
you can't
main
see
floor.
the
You
stuff,
can't
yeah.
see. We want it to be a productive use of time, so we'll use this space. But again, we may cycle some staff in and out of the room as necessary. Nikki mentioned it before, you'll get the personnel report along with it, along with the hard copy budget, and then the budget book itself, which we hope is going to be as complete as possible, so that what you see in December when you're asked to approve it is essentially the same document, unless there are changes that we make on the 14th of November. Okay. Weird this year, the village board meeting in December is December 21st, which is as late as it can be. And Nikki will rush the next day to submit the tax levy, which I believe is the deadline. So we're coming in right under the wire. But that's just from a planning standpoint, we'll have a long break between the November and December meetings, but we'll rush to get everything.
I might do that night. We'll see.
You might,
Yeah.
yeah. Okay, that's all I had, sorry.
That's okay. Any other business, he asked cautiously. Then may I have a motion to adjourn, please?
Second.
Third.
There you go.
All in favor, say aye. Aye. All right, we're adjourned.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
This was excellent. Appreciate it.